Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. Here are our top stories. Bitcoin is breaking records because of institutional investors, and the U.S. Treasury wants complete cryptocurrency control. Well, joining us now to discuss this and more is Kevin Kelly. He is co-founder of Delphi Digital. Kevin, Happy New Year. Great to see you this morning.
Happy New Year to you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and look, I'm excited to talk to you because new year and crypto just continues, especially Bitcoin, just continues on its ascendancy, broke 34,000 this past weekend, January 2nd, I believe. First, I want to get your reaction to that, and let's talk about who's buying. So what's your reaction to this ascendancy here?
Yeah, it's one of those things that we think, again, is kind of been a long time coming, right? If you look at the macro backdrop that we've talked about, almost nonstop on your program over the last 12 to 18 months, it really is ripe for Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto markets to outperform. I think looking back at 2020, what was interesting, and we just put out this note about Bitcoin sitting at the top or as king of the hill yet again, another year in a row. If you look back at 2019, Bitcoin was up roughly 90 to 95%. You had, a bit of a risk on rally as well there, but Bitcoin again, second year in a row, really leading just about every major asset class that's out there. Didn't quite have the performance in 2020 that something like a Tesla would, but when we're talking about speculative assets and Bitcoin potentially being the, global reserve currency of the emerging internet and crypto economy. Certainly thought that 2020 was a great year, but also really, really bullish about what's going to happen here in 2021 and beyond.
So Kevin, it begs the question, why the ascendancy? And is it that institutional investors are opening up their wallets? Is that the right word to use? They're going out, they're opening up their portfolios, maybe it's the better word, and they're going out and selecting crypto. Is that the case here?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it has a bit of a domino effect to it, right? As we've talked about before, especially when it comes to your more, we'll call it regulated investors, there is a lot of scrutiny around, what you're investing in, understanding what it is that you're investing in, obviously, and Bitcoin, as we know, can get a bit, not only esoteric, but a bit in the weeds for those who really want to learn more about it. And so it isn't the most simple asset that's out there, right? And so I think one was education in 2020 was a big kind of theme, not only for us at Delphi, but across kind of the crypto industry, trying to bring more what we call non-crypto initiated into the crypto community and have them understand what the value proposition of Bitcoin and crypto assets are. The flip side is, and what you just alluded to, is you now have, real kind of institutional and sophisticated investors coming into the space, some really large kind of capital allocators that can really move the market. And when I mentioned the domino effect, it's what you've seen with, some of these big kind of global macro investors like a Paul Tudor Jones coming out and saying, holding a position in Bitcoin and basically explaining the thesis, around why they're betting on something like Bitcoin versus a gold or other precious metals. I think just having those types of investors come out and basically, give Bitcoin their stamp of approval, we've seen this kind of domino effect that has gone from, again, your kind of global macro hedge funds. Now it's even trickling into the wealth management industry. You have a lot of RIAs, financial advisors, trying to figure out how to get clients exposure to something like Bitcoin, as well as trying to understand what it is, right? So it's this kind of constant game of catch up around what's going on in the crypto industry, but it's an exciting time to be in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of drill down. You mentioned a hedge similar to gold, right? So what does that exactly mean? So gold is oftentimes seen as it's a hard asset. It's very valuable. But how can Bitcoin be used like gold?
Yeah, so if you think about the kind of characteristics that Bitcoin has, in the short to medium term, a lot of those are similar drivers to what you'd expect in the gold market. And one of those, the big ones is scarcity, right? So while gold is not the most scarce asset necessarily, it has a very kind of predictable supply, right? So gold miners going out and actually discovering new gold and the amount of supply that comes to market in any given year is relatively predictable. With Bitcoin, it's even more so to the point where it's ingrained in the code. Right? So you know exactly what Bitcoin supply schedule and emission schedule is going to be going out, 100 years from now. That's one kind of big key core aspect to this whole digital gold argument. The flip side to that, and this is where I think some of the, maybe we'll call them gold bugs and Bitcoin maximalists really kind of butt heads, is I think that Bitcoin sits in this really unique position where, given the fact that it is digitally native and given the fact that it has created this very unique unseen before asset in terms of being permissionless and allowing basically anyone to utilize it and transact and send value across the Bitcoin network. What that basically has done and created is this potential, alternative digitally native store of value that is built, almost exclusively for the internet and emerging digital economy. And so that's where I think the gold argument is going to start to trail off a bit. Not to say that, again, we sit in the drop gold camp by any means. I have never been a huge proponent of gold necessarily, but given everything that we're seeing with this macro backdrop and what's happening to fiat currencies and the expectations for what's going to happen to fiat currency debasement, that's playing into to be a huge theme for us around the Bitcoin trade. And similarly, it's a good argument to hold gold in the portfolio as well. We just think Bitcoin's going to serve almost as this much higher beta version of something like gold and trade on that scarcity trade.
So Kevin, if 2020 and 2021 are the year of the institutional investor when it comes to digital currency, when do we see it really take off among retail investors? And I know that there are a lot of younger people who are understand the technology and are using this. But when do we see broad adoption so that retail investors may have access, assuming, by the way, caveat this with that they do their due diligence and they understand what they're investing in?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones obviously going to be, whenever we get a Bitcoin ETF approved, right? And there's speculation it could be by the end of this year. A lot of people also calling for it to be in 2022, but regardless, I think it's more kind of a when, not an if type scenario at this point. But along similar lines, really having more kind of diversified products out there that allow, advisors, for example, to put their clients into Bitcoin. I think as the competition around that space heats up and as more investment products come to market and eventually we get that ETF approval, that's when I really think you'll start to see the acceleration around retail and your kind of mom and pop investors too, because one of the things that Bitcoin, those who are kind of Bitcoin native preach all the time is what they call not your keys, not your Bitcoin, right? So holding that, self-custodying the Bitcoin itself. And to be frank, most people don't want to take on that responsibility, right? And that's okay. And so I think as you get more investment products that take away or make it easier for them to get access and exposure to Bitcoin without having to go through a lot of the different nuances for self-custody, I think that's where you're going to see more, again, acceleration in the retail adoption, because then you have a product that looks similar to, let's say, a gold ETF, for example.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to see. And I'm excited for Bitcoin and other cryptos. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch 2021 to see how this all unfolds, especially against it looks like a rebounding economy. Kevin, I want to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Kevin about the flip side, and that is the U.S. Treasury wants to take control of cryptocurrency. We'll learn more. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate copays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month. Look, with the uncertainty of the virus and vaccines, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Here's the bottom line. Call to get significant benefits at no additional cost and see if your zip code has coverage with the Give Back benefit. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-924-3920. That's 1-800-924-3920.
Welcome back. We're talking to Kevin Kelly of Delphi Digital. Kevin, thanks for staying with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, great story on Bitcoin. And look, it has continued, and other cryptocurrencies really continued to gain momentum, gain traction, and gain portfolio advantage. Now here comes the U.S. Treasury. They want more reporting and are actually looking to maybe take some control and maybe eviscerate some privacy rules. What can you tell us of what's going on here?
Yeah, so in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've really seen the regulatory landscape, I could say, kind of ramp up around not only Bitcoin, but crypto at large, some regulation around stable coins. And so kind of weeding through a lot of the muck. One thing that I think is interesting about the FinCEN rules in the U.S. Treasury, as you mentioned, is basically they're essentially trying to get a hold on reporting or increase the reporting and transparency around transactions of a certain size, around $3,000. But also for some of these, U.S. exchanges, anyone who's transacting $10,000 or more has to these exchanges basically have to provide, a whole litany of information around who it is that's transacting, obviously the amount, who they're transacting with. And so what I think is regulation is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, yes, when you're talking to kind of your crypto native, I won't say the more kind of anarchist type mentalities, right? Not that extremist, but the people who are really kind of, born and bred within the crypto industry, a lot of this news was negative, right? Because the first question or the first idea that pops into people's head is you're basically taking away all the freedoms and the privacy that we thought that Bitcoin and crypto would be able to provide for us. On the flip side, if we're talking about things like institutional investors coming in and even some of your retail investors, right? Well, I'll use mom and pops, but that really goes beyond, just them. It could be your kind of mid-level managers. It could be doctors. It could be lawyers. It could be anybody who basically sits outside the crypto investing industry. As you get more kind of retail involvement in this space, I do think that the protections that regulators are trying to put into place certainly can potentially have a place, I guess you could say. And if you want institutional capital to come into this market, we need to have a bit more of a tighter regulatory landscape within the U.S. That being said, the long-term questions that we've been raising, and a lot of people have been raising, is how far does this go, right? What happens to that data? Where is it stored, and also how much information will these regulators have on people who start to transact within crypto? Because again, if you think about something like Bitcoin, often a common misconception is that you transact completely anonymously, right? And that's not necessarily the case. If you have a wallet address and you can tie that to somebody's identity, well, then you have an entire history and literal kind of paper trail of transactions that wallet or that user has made, right? And so that is where it gets to be a slippery slope in terms of just how much oversight some of these regulators will actually have going forward, if and when these rules are put into place.
Yeah, certainly disclosure makes sense, and we do disclose potentially for other holdings. Kevin, is this more about taxation? Because I've been reading a lot about the Internal Revenue Service gearing up for taxation around cryptocurrency. Is this more about taxation, or might this be concern about foreign actors or some of these other markets that are using crypto? Maybe they're adversaries of the U.S. Is it partly that, or is it both?
Part of it certainly is, I think, taxation long term, right? If you look at what's happened in the cannabis industry, for example, that's been kind of a tailwind for certain states actually adopting looser regulations around cannabis, right? And making it actually legal, at least at a state level, because again, that taxation is potentially a large bucket. The other side of this is if you think about, putting on the kind of macro hat, and you think about the U.S. dollar and its role and its dominance within our global financial system, what's really interesting is that we've actually seen within the last 48 hours or so announcements that the U.S. Federally chartered banks will actually be able to use some of these permissionless blockchains and stable coins to send cross-border payments and transact within their different branches, right? And so what I think that's really important for is, again, if you think big picture, using stable coins are largely made up of U.S. dollar denominated stable coins. If that market is really U.S. dollar dominant, then if you're doing things or putting in regulations to increase or protect the usage of stable coins in some type of, again, bank regulated way, then that kind of keeps the U.S. dollar potentially, if this market gets big enough, keeps the U.S. dollar kind of right in the primary eye, I guess you'd say, of the global financial system, right? So it can kind of almost seal or be a tailwind potentially for keeping the dollar, afloat for longer.
Yeah, the thing as you were talking, I was thinking about the reserve currency, and that currently is the U.S. dollar. Kevin, what does this mean let's talk about broader privacy concerns, because this is something on the heels of some of these data breaches, which isn't necessarily related to Bitcoin, but hacks that have happened. We had the solar wind hack that we've all heard about, major government hack. But what does this mean in general to privacy? Is cryptocurrency, are there protocols in place? Is the nature of cryptocurrency to protect privacy?
Yeah, I think it is. And privacy, at least for us, is something that I think is extremely important. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be the catalyst to get people into the crypto markets, right? It's more so once you're transacting, once you're doing things in a system that is, a lot more transparent than our financial system is today in a lot of ways. When you start to think about the way in which different actors and investor types interact with one another, how they, purchase assets, how they hold those assets, how that portfolio can be monitored from external parties. There's a lot of really interesting ways in which privacy actually could be a huge benefit for both your kind of institutional and your retail investors or crypto market participants. The question around long-term privacy and where this really takes us, I'll go back to that initial comment I made. I think it really depends on the size and scope of this. And this is where central bank digital currencies come in, and what you're seeing with the Chinese yuan and how that's been, essentially digitized. The oversight that you're going to have, I think, from some of these governments is going to potentially, stifle the usage of these central bank digital currencies, because people are going to wake up and recognize that there are other, I won't say necessarily more decentralized versions, but ones that aren't necessarily tracking as much information or making as much information, I guess, transparent than something like central bank digital currency could. So there's going to be, again, it's going to be really interesting to see play out, because I'm sure that the governments, especially the U.S., are going to use some type of incentive to actually have people use their central bank digital currency or digital dollar. But it's something we're watching, very closely, especially as we head into 2021.
The U.S. Treasury comes out, Kevin, with these rules. Do they go into effect? I mean, do they? They're out for proposal, I guess, for comments will come back. Lots of comments for what I've been reading, and probably they'll change things. But is it the expectation that in some form in 2021 we get some final regs that appear in the Federal Register?
Yeah, I think sometime 2021 by year end, certainly a possibility. To your point, from my understanding from people, I've talked to who are a bit, closer to the matter, because I'm no regulatory expert myself. They even said that, as some of these proposals were coming out and these announcements were coming out, that some regulators and lawmakers hadn't even seen the plans until they were kind of published, right? So I don't think there's necessarily broad support in Washington for some of these potential proposals. And so that's what this kind of period of, comments from not only people in the industry, in the crypto industry, but also lawmakers wrapping their heads around, exactly what these plans entail. I don't think it's necessarily going to be, just a rubber stamp and move on and put these regulations in place. But I do think we will get more regulation, certainly by year end here.
Well, Kevin, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Really an interesting topic. Good to see that Bitcoin is on the ascendancy. Really happy about that. Great that we can have a conversation about this. Enjoyed talking with you today, and have a great rest of the week. And we'll talk to you again very soon.
I had a great time. Thanks, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.